There are questions that make scientists go silent, not because they don't know the answers, but because the answers would destroy careers, end funding, and shatter comfortable assumptions that entire fields are built on. These aren't mysteries science is working to solve. These are questions science actively avoids asking because the implications are too dangerous. In 1953, Stanley Miller created amino acids from simple chemicals and electricity, proving life could emerge from non-life. Every biology textbook celebrates this experiment. But here's what they don't tell you. In 70 years since Miller's experiment, despite billions in funding and thousands of researchers, science has never created a single living cell from scratch. Not even close. We can't even create a functional bacterial cell using all the parts. The origin of life remains completely unexplained, and scientists have quietly stopped trying. In 1998, scientists discovered the universe's expansion is accelerating. They had no explanation. So they invented dark energy, a mysterious force that makes up 68% of the universe. 25 years later, we still have no idea what dark energy actually is. It's not a discovery, it's a label for our ignorance. But admitting we have no idea what most of the universe is made of would undermine the entire foundation of cosmology. In 2018, a meta-analysis of antidepressant studies found that pharmaceutical companies had published positive results but buried negative ones. The real effectiveness rate was barely better than placebo. Hundreds of millions of people take these medications. Billions of dollars in revenue depend on them working. But the data says they barely work at all. And psychiatry has spent 5 years trying to explain away these results rather than confronting them. But here's what should terrify anyone who trusts the science. These aren't fringe theories or conspiracy nonsense. These are fundamental questions that strike at the heart of physics, biology, psychology, and cosmology. Questions with massive implications that scientists desperately want to avoid. Because answering them honestly would mean admitting that entire fields are built on assumptions we can't prove, theories we can't test, and comfortable lies we keep telling. This is every question science is terrified to answer, why the truth would destroy careers and funding, and why you'll never hear honest answers from the experts whose livelihoods depend on avoiding these questions. 1. Why can't we create life from non-life? If life emerged naturally from chemicals 3.8 billion years ago, why can't we recreate it in a lab with all our technology? Every biology textbook tells the story of a biogenesis, life emerging from non-living matter through natural processes. Miller-Urey experiment in 1953 created amino acids. Success. Life explained, except we're not even 1% of the way there. Here's what science won't admit. Creating amino acids is like having a pile of bricks and claiming you've built a house. A living cell requires DNA, RNA, proteins, lipid membranes, protein folding, error correction mechanisms, and regulatory networks all working simultaneously. We've never created any of this from scratch. But here's the terrifying part. We can't even assemble a functional cell using all the parts. Take a bacteria. Extract all its DNA, proteins, lipids, everything. Now try to put them back together into a living cell. Impossible. We have all the components. We know what they do. And we still can't make it work. It's like having every part of a car and being unable to make it start. Scientists estimate the probability of even the simplest self-replicating molecule forming randomly at 10 circumflex 40,000. That's a decimal point, followed by 40,000 zeros. There have only been 10 circumflex, 17 seconds since the Big Bang. The math doesn't work. The theory doesn't work. But admitting this would undermine the entire naturalistic framework of biology. So science just doesn't talk about it. Origin of life research gets minimal funding. Major biology departments don't even offer courses on it. The textbooks show the Miller-Urey experiment and move on quickly. Because if you can't explain how life started, all of evolutionary biology rests on a foundation of somehow it happened, and somehow isn't science. 2. What is consciousness and where does it come from? How does physical matter in your brain create subjective experience? Your brain is 3 pounds of meat operating on 20 watts of electricity. Neurons firing electrochemical signals. Nothing in that description explains why you have an internal experience of being you. Why does processing information in neurons create the feeling of seeing red, tasting chocolate, or feeling pain? This is called the hard problem of consciousness. Science can explain the easy problems, how visual information is processed, how memories are stored, how decisions are made. But science cannot explain why any of this feels like anything. Why is there subjective experience at all? Here's what makes scientists uncomfortable. Every attempt to explain consciousness through purely physical processes fails. Some scientists claim consciousness is an illusion, but that makes no sense. If consciousness is an illusion, who's being fooled? An illusion requires someone experiencing the illusion, which means consciousness exists. Some scientists claim consciousness emerges from complex neural networks. But emergence isn't an explanation. It's just giving a name to the mystery. Saying consciousness emerges from neurons is like saying wetness emerges from H2O molecules. Except we can explain wetness through molecular behavior. We cannot explain consciousness through neural behavior at all. The terrifying possibility, consciousness might not be produced by the brain. The brain might be more like a receiver than a generator. But this possibility opens doors to territory science desperately wants to avoid: dualism, soul's non-material reality. So instead, scientists insist consciousness is just neurons while completely failing to explain how neurons create experience. Billions in funding for neuroscience. Thousands of consciousness studies. Zero progress on the fundamental question. Because the honest answer might be, we have no idea, and materialism might be wrong. 3. Why does the placebo effect work so well? If sugar pills with no active ingredients cure people 30 to 40% of the time, what does that say about medicine? The placebo effect is medicine's dirty secret. In clinical trials, placebo groups consistently show improvement rates of 30 to 40%. For some conditions like depression and pain, placebo effectiveness reaches 50 to 60%. That's not noise in the data. That's a massive effect that medicine can't explain and doesn't want to acknowledge. But here's what makes it worse. The placebo effect is getting stronger. Antidepressant trials in the 1980s showed clear superiority over placebo. Modern trials barely beat placebo. Some fail entirely. This isn't because drugs are getting worse, it's because placebo effects are getting stronger. And medicine has no idea why. Even more disturbing, the color of the pill matters. Blue pills work better as sedatives. Red pills work better as stimulants. Large pills work better than small pills. Expensive placebos work better than cheap ones. Brand name placebos work better than generic placebos. None of this makes physical sense. It's pure psychology affecting physical outcomes in ways that shouldn't be possible if the body were just a mechanical system. Here's the question science avoids. If belief can cure people 30 to 40% of the time, what does that say about the other 60 to 70%? How much of medicine's effectiveness is the drug, and how much is belief in the drug? Pharmaceutical companies fund studies to prove their drugs work. But if you can't beat placebo by a large margin, maybe the drugs aren't really working. Maybe belief is doing most of the work. Admitting this would devastate pharmaceutical profits and undermine the entire medical model. So instead, science treats placebo as an annoying variable to control for, not a phenomenon to understand. Because understanding it might mean admitting that consciousness and belief have physical effects we can't explain. 4. Why do we dream? Really, if dreams serve no evolutionary purpose, why do we spend 25 years of our life doing it? Sleep science has explanations for why we sleep. Memory consolidation, metabolic regulation, cellular repair. But dreams, Science has no convincing explanation. We spend 8 years of our lives in REM sleep, having vivid, bizarre experiences that seem to serve no function. The standard explanation: dreams are random neural firing that your brain tries to make sense of. But this explanation is terrible. Why are they coherent narratives? Why do they have emotional themes? Why do you never dream about eating breakfast, but frequently dream about falling, being chased, or showing up naked to school? But here's what's really disturbing. Some dreams are precognitive. People dream about events before they happen. This is documented extensively but dismissed as coincidence. Some dreams solve problems. Kekulé discovering benzene structure, Mendeleev organizing the periodic table, Paul McCartney composing Yesterday in a dream. How does random neural firing solve chemistry problems or compose music? And then there's lucid dreaming. Some people can become conscious during dreams and control them. They can practice skills, have conversations, explore environments, all while brain scans show they're definitely asleep. How does that work if dreams are just random noise? Science doesn't want to touch this because honest investigation might suggest consciousness exists independently of waking brain states. That dreams might be more than neural static, that the mind might have capabilities beyond physical brain function, all of which opens doors to territory science, once sealed shut. 5. Why does quantum mechanics require an observer? Why do quantum particles behave differently when observed? In the double-slit experiment, electrons behave as waves when unobserved and particles when observed. The act of measurement changes reality. This has been proven thousands of times. It's not disputed, but it makes no sense. Here's the problem. What counts as an observer? A human? A camera? A detector? Where's the line between observation and non-observation? And why would the universe care if someone's watching? Some physicists say there is no observer effect. It's just measurement interference. But experiments have eliminated measurement interference. The observer effect persists. Some physicists say consciousness causes quantum collapse. But that sounds like mysticism, so most physicists reject it without addressing the evidence. The many worlds interpretation says every quantum event splits the universe into parallel branches. You're constantly splitting into countless parallel versions. This isn't science. It's unfalsifiable metaphysics invented to avoid saying consciousness matters. But here's what terrifies physicists. If observation affects reality at the quantum level, and quantum effects scale up to macroscopic reality, which they do through quantum biology, then consciousness might be fundamentally woven into physics. That observation might not be passive, it might be active creation of reality. This possibility is so disturbing to materialist science that physicists spend careers inventing increasingly absurd interpretations to avoid it. Parallel universes, pilot waves, retrocausality, anything except admitting that consciousness might be fundamental to reality. 6. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does the universe exist at all? Science has no answer. Physics can explain what happened after the Big Bang, but why was there a Big Bang? Why is there a universe capable of having a Big Bang? Why are there laws of physics instead of no laws? Why is there anything? Some physicists say the universe came from nothing, but they redefine nothing to mean quantum vacuum, which is something. A quantum vacuum has energy, follows laws, can fluctuate. That's not nothing. That's a very specific something that requires explanation. Some physicists say the universe is eternal, no beginning. But the second law of thermodynamics says entropy always increases. An eternal universe would have reached maximum entropy infinite time ago. We wouldn't exist, so the universe can't be eternal. But it also can't have begun from nothing. Logic says both options are impossible. We exist anyway. But here's what science won't touch. The universe appears fine-tuned for life. The cosmological constant, strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, electromagnetic force, and gravitational constant are all precisely calibrated. Change any of them by 1%, and stars don't form, atoms don't bond, life doesn't exist. The probability of these constants being randomly set to life-permitting values is estimated at 10 circumflex 120. That's functionally impossible. So physicists invented the multiverse, infinite universes with different constants. We just happen to be in the lucky one. This is unfalsifiable, untestable, and completely unscientific. It's a just-so story to avoid the implication that the universe might be designed. Because if the universe is designed, that implies a designer. And science has spent 400 years removing God from explanations. Admitting the universe looks designed would undo centuries of materialist progress. So instead, we invent infinite unprovable universes. 7. What is 95% of the universe made of? If we can only detect 5% of the universe, what is the other 95%? Observable matter, stars, planets, galaxies, gas, dust, accounts for 5% of the universe's mass energy. The rest is dark matter, 27%, and dark energy, 68%. We've never directly detected either. We know they exist only because without them, our equations don't work. Dark matter, invisible substance that doesn't interact with light but has gravitational effects. We invented it because galaxies rotate too fast. They should fly apart based on visible matter. So we added invisible matter to make the math work. 70 years of searching, billions in funding, zero direct detection. It might not exist. Gravity might just work differently than we think. But admitting that would invalidate Einstein's equations and require rewriting physics. Dark energy, mysterious force causing the universe's expansion to accelerate. We discovered it in 1998 because distant supernovae were dimmer than expected. Our solution? Invent an invisible force that fills the universe and pushes things apart. What is dark energy? We have no idea. How does it work? No clue. Why does it exist? Unknown. It's not a discovery. It's a label for ignorance. But here's the embarrassing truth. We understand 5% of the universe. The other 95% is complete mystery that we've covered with labels. Imagine a doctor who says you're 95% sick with dark blood and dark organ disease because his instruments only detect 5% of your body. That's cosmology. And scientists avoid this question because admitting we don't know what most of the universe is would undermine public trust in science. Better to use confident labels like dark matter and dark energy than admit fundamental ignorance. 8. Why can't we explain how birds migrate? How do birds navigate thousands of miles to specific locations they've never seen? Arctic terns migrate 44,000 miles annually from Arctic to Antarctic and back. Bar-tailed godwits fly 7,000 miles non-stop over the Pacific. Young birds make these journeys alone without guidance, hitting precise destinations. How? Science says magnetic field detection. Birds sense Earth's magnetic field and use it for navigation. Except experiments show birds navigate accurately, even when magnetic fields are disrupted. They navigate under complete cloud cover. They navigate through magnetic storms. The magnetic theory doesn't fully explain it. Science also says sun and star positions. Except nocturnal migrants navigate under solid cloud cover with no visible stars. Daytime migrants navigate through storms with no visible sun. The celestial navigation theory is incomplete. But here's what really breaks the model. Displaced birds return to their exact nesting sites. Take a bird, 1,000 miles off course, release it, and it compensates and finds home. It's never been in this location before. There are no landmarks, yet it knows exactly which direction to fly and how far. This shouldn't be possible with magnetic or celestial navigation. Some birds navigate using smell. Some use infrasound. Some use polarized light. Every explanation science invents has exceptions. The honest answer is, we don't know how birds navigate. They possess capabilities we can't explain with physics as we understand it. And science avoids deeper investigation because it might reveal that animals have sensory capabilities or information processing abilities that don't fit materialist explanations. Better to keep adding epicycles to inadequate theories than admit the mystery is deeper than we thought. 9. Why do identical twins separated at birth live? Why do identical twins raised apart show identical preferences, careers, and life choices? Twin studies are deeply uncomfortable for social science. Identical twins separated at birth and raised in completely different families show shocking similarities. Same careers, same hobbies, marry people with the same names, name their dogs the same names, develop the same obscure phobias. The correlations are inexplicable. The Minnesota twin study followed twins separated at birth for decades. Results were disturbing. Genetics accounted for 40 to 50% of personality traits, 60 to 70% of intelligence, 40 to 60% of religious belief, and 30 to 40% of political ideology. Environment mattered less than scientists wanted to believe. But here's what makes it worse. Some twins report feeling each other's pain across distances. The other feels it. One twin dies, the other knows immediately despite being thousands of miles away. This is dismissed as anecdote, but it's reported consistently across cultures and time periods. Science avoids this because it threatens the blank slate model, the idea that humans are shaped primarily by environment and culture. If genetics determines 50% plus of who you are, then social engineering has limited effectiveness. Education has limited impact. Worse, if twins can feel each other across distances, that suggests non-local consciousness connections that physics doesn't allow. So science focuses on the genetic findings while dismissing the weirder observations. Because admitting twins have unexplained connections would open doors to telepathy, which is forbidden territory. 10. Why do children remember past lives? Why do young children provide accurate details about deceased people they couldn't have known about? Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia documented over 2,500 cases of children claiming to remember past lives. Many provided specific verifiable details, names of deceased persons, locations of houses, names of relatives, causes of death, personal possessions, details that were verified through records. The standard explanation, coincidence and suggestion, except Stevenson documented cases where children described events that happened before they were born, in locations they'd never visited, about people their families had never heard of. Information that was later verified through historical records. But here's what makes scientists uncomfortable. Some children have birthmarks matching wounds on the deceased person they claim to have been. Sword wounds, gunshot injuries, surgical scars. The correlation is documented photographically. How does a child develop a birthmark matching a stranger's wound? Stevenson's work was methodologically rigorous and published in peer-reviewed journals. He investigated each case for fraud, suggestion, and alternative explanations. Many cases survived scrutiny. The simplest explanation is that some children remember previous lives. But science can't accept this because it implies consciousness survives death. So the research is ignored. Stevenson spent 40 years documenting cases. After his death, the research continues at University of Virginia, but mainstream science refuses to engage with it. It's too threatening. If consciousness survives death, materialism is wrong. The brain doesn't produce consciousness, it receives it. And science has spent centuries eliminating that possibility. Better to ignore thousands of documented cases than admit materialism might be incomplete. 11. Why do antidepressants barely beat placebo? If SSRIs work through serotonin mechanisms, why do they barely outperform sugar pills? The serotonin hypothesis of depression says low serotonin causes depression, and SSRIs like Prozac increase serotonin, treating depression. This theory dominates psychiatry. Billions in medication sales depend on it, except the evidence shows it's mostly wrong. Meta-analyses of all antidepressant trials, including unpublished ones buried by pharmaceutical companies, show SSRIs beat placebo by 1.8 points on the Hamilton Depression Scale. The scale goes to 52 points. The difference is clinically meaningless. For severe depression, the advantage is slightly larger. For mild to moderate depression, SSRIs are essentially fancy placebos. But here's the devastating part. People with naturally low serotonin don't have higher depression rates. Artificially lowering serotonin in healthy people doesn't cause depression. Drugs that increase serotonin don't work faster than drugs that decrease serotonin. The serotonin theory is built on shaky foundations, but psychiatry has built an empire on it. And it gets worse. The trials showing SSRIs work were funded by pharmaceutical companies. Independent trials show much smaller effects. Publication bias means negative results were buried. When you account for all trials, published and unpublished, the effects shrink to barely significant. This should be a massive scandal. Millions take these medications. Many experience side effects, sexual dysfunction, emotional numbing, weight gain, and the benefits are barely better than placebo. But psychiatry defends SSRIs because the alternative is admitting they've been prescribing expensive placebos for 30 years. Science avoids this question because facing it honestly would devastate pharmaceutical profits and undermine psychiatry's credibility. 12. Why can't we explain gravity? If we understand gravity so well, why can't we explain what it actually is? We can predict gravity's effects perfectly. We can calculate orbital mechanics, build GPS satellites, and send probes to distant planets. But we have no idea what gravity actually is or how it works. Newton's gravity, invisible force that pulls masses together. But how? Newton admitted he had no mechanism. Einstein's gravity, curved space-time. Masses bend space, objects follow the curvature. Brilliant! Except, what is space-time? How does mass curve something that isn't material? What mechanism allows matter to bend geometry? Einstein shifted the mystery, but didn't solve it. Quantum gravity should exist to unify quantum mechanics and general relativity. Except, nobody has successfully created a quantum theory of gravity. String theory tries. Loop quantum gravity tries. Both require untestable assumptions and dimensions we can't observe. Neither works. But here's what breaks everything. Gravity is 10 circumflex, 40 times weaker than other forces. Why? No explanation. The cosmological constant is 10 circumflex, 120 times smaller than quantum field theory predicts. Why? No explanation. These aren't minor gaps, they're catastrophic failures of our theories. And then there's dark matter, invented entirely because gravity doesn't behave as our equations predict. Maybe dark matter exists, or maybe we fundamentally misunderstand gravity. But admitting that would mean Einstein was wrong, and modern physics is built on Einstein's foundations. Science avoids confronting these problems because the alternative is admitting our most fundamental theory might be incomplete in ways we can't fix. 13. Why do near-death experiences feel more real than reality? If consciousness is produced by the brain, why do people report hyper-lucid awareness when their brains are non-functional? Millions of people report near-death experiences, leaving their bodies, moving through tunnels, encountering deceased relatives, experiencing overwhelming peace, reviewing their lives. Then they return and report that the experience felt more real than normal waking consciousness. Science's explanation: oxygen deprivation causes hallucinations, except NDEs are reported during different causes of near-death, cardiac arrest, drowning, trauma, surgery. The phenomenology is consistent across cultures and causes. Oxygen deprivation causes confusion and disorientation, not hyper-lucid, organized experiences. But here's what terrifies neuroscience. Some NDE patients report accurate details from their unconscious state. They describe conversations in other rooms, medical procedures they witnessed from above their bodies, details later verified by medical staff. This shouldn't be possible if consciousness is produced by the brain. Pam Reynolds had documented awareness during surgery with no brain activity. Her brain was cooled, blood drained, EEG flatlined. Clinically, she was dead. Yet she reported accurate details of the surgery, conversations, and tools used, verified by the surgical team. How? The materialist explanation: consciousness persisted in isolated brain regions despite no measurable activity. But this is special pleading. If consciousness requires brain activity, and there's no brain activity, consciousness shouldn't exist. The data contradicts the theory. But rather than question the theory, science invents epicycles, because the alternative is too threatening. Consciousness might not depend on the brain. It might continue after death, and if consciousness survives death, materialism is wrong. The implications are so profound that science would rather ignore thousands of documented cases than confront them. Why science avoids these questions? These aren't mysteries science is working to solve. These are questions science actively avoids because honest answers would destroy materialist assumptions that consciousness is produced by brains, that reality is purely physical, that everything can be explained through matter and energy. Undermine funding because admitting ignorance on fundamental questions would erode public trust and reduce research grants. End careers because scientists who pursue forbidden questions, consciousness, survival, design, non-material causation, are marginalized, denied tenure, and excluded from mainstream journals. Validate religion because honest answers to these questions point toward design, purpose, consciousness beyond matter, and possibly a designer. Science is supposed to follow evidence wherever it leads. But when evidence leads toward conclusions that threaten materialist orthodoxy, science stops following. Instead, it invents increasingly elaborate explanations: multiverses, emergence, quantum fluctuations, dark matter, dark energy, anything to avoid saying, "We don't know," or materialism might be wrong. These 15 questions aren't fringe conspiracy theories. They're fundamental problems acknowledged by scientists, but never honestly confronted. Because confronting them would mean admitting that science doesn't have all the answers, that materialism might be incomplete, deeper, and more mysterious than the neat mechanical universe we've constructed. And those admissions would terrify science more than anything else.